Hello, Blake Rudis here with Everyday HDR and HDRinsider.com, and today I want to talk about something pretty rudimentary. Now, I say rudimentary for some of the more advanced users that usually follow what I do, but one of the things that I've never done, and I've gotten a lot of requests over the last couple days, is a basic layers and masking tutorial. Now, typically what I do is more on the more advanced level, I guess you could say, and I kind of take for granted sometimes what I know about layers and masking. So what I'm going to try to do right here in Photoshop is show a very basic layer and masking tutorial. So the first thing we need to do here, if we're going to set ourselves up for success with basic layers and masking, is we need to get our workspace set up correctly. Now, I have mine set up as Blake's Workspace. Now, if you go up here to the workspace, you can choose different types of workspaces. Now, if I'm doing stuff with video, I'll choose motion, but really what I'm trying to do here is photography. With photography, what it's going to do is going to set you up with a layers palette down here and a channels palette down here. Now, I have to start that out so that we can all get on the same level playing field. Now, I believe these workspaces took in effect around CS6, CC, maybe even CS5, not quite sure. But when you're looking at Photoshop, what you want is you want your layers and your channels at the bottom, because those are very important for photographers. We definitely want properties, history, and adjustments right here. Navigator and histogram are good up here, but what I like to add up there is the info palette, because that info palette is also going to tell me things about what certain colors are and the CMYK color combination of things. Now, anything that you drag and drop and move into here is going to add it to a different area. So that's how I have mine set up. Layers and channels down here. Sometimes paths if I'm working with paths, but we won't get into that now. Properties, histories, and adjustments. Next thing we need to look at is go to Edit and go to Preferences. Not there. Edit, Preferences, and let's just go to General for the time being. Now, when we look at Interface, you're going to see two items here. Open documents as tabs and enable floating document window docking. Typically, Photoshop wants you to have those set by default. Now, what that does is it makes it very difficult to drag and drop things from one image to another. I like to have my images just kind of floating around in Photoshop. So if you have enable floating document window docking enabled, when you click and drag something like this, it's going to automatically magnetize to the top here and get docked. I don't like that. I like mine to be able to be free floating all over my landscape, kind of how you see here. If you have open documents as tabs, it's going to be just like you're in Internet Explorer or you're in Chrome, where every time you open up an image, it's going to line up tabs up here at the top, which makes it kind of difficult to switch from one image to the next. So I, by default, click off of those. So the next thing we need to look at is our layers palette. So let's just make a new layer. Go to File, go to New. Now, when you go to New, what I'm going to go here is go to Inches, and I'm going to make this 10 inches by 10 inches at 300 resolution. Okay, just a pretty arbitrary number. Now I'm pressing Command or Control R right now to take the rulers off, so there's less that you're seeing. If you press Command or Control R, it will toggle the rulers, which are really nice because we made a 10 by 10 document. Guess what? We got 10 inches along the top, 10 inches along the side. Control R, Command R to remove those if you don't want to see them. So here's our layers palette. Our layers palette is down here. We're going to break down the layers palette from right to left, essentially, because that's the area of importance that I feel here for this tutorial. So the first thing in your layers palette, whether you open up a new layer or you open up an image, you're going to see background with a lock. Now, if you try to press Control T to transform this, it's not going to let you because it's locked. It wants that background layer to be locked. So if you double click it, it's going to say, oh, you want to make this a new layer. Well, let's just make it layer 0 and press OK. So that changes our background layer to layer 0. So now if I wanted to transform it by pressing Command or Control T, I can now transform that layer because it's not locked. Now, I don't want to do that. I simply wanted to show you that if you want to remove that lock, just double click anywhere inside on that right hand side next to the lock on the left. So then right here you have a new layer icon. So before we do that, let's just go ahead and make a square. And let's change this square's color to, let's say, blue, a dark blue, so it's easier to see. It's a little bit easier on your eyes to see that dark blue. Now this layer that I just made is a shape. So if I go to the shape tool and I make a shape, it's going to be a shape here. One of the things about layers, if you right click any of them, it's going to give you all kinds of properties. A lot of times this is way in over our head. You know, we're thinking, we've got colors here. I can change the color of that layer. I can make that orange. Well, let's say it's an important layer and you want to make sure that you can always see it. Make it orange. All right. We can also right click it. Because this is a shape, we have to rasterize this layer before we can do much editing with it. Now, as a shape, you can do all kinds of stuff with a shape. Let's just go ahead and press the rasterize layer icon here. So now we made a layer on top of a layer. If you look at the eyeball here, that's a visible eyeball. You can turn the eyeball on, you can turn the eyeball off, and that gives you a visibility here. So let's make a new layer. If you see here that you got this checkerboard, that means that the layer that you have over top of it is essentially a piece of cellophane. That cellophane is clear. Right now there's nothing on that cellophane, so it's 100% clear and you can see everything below it. Now if we press our brush key and we make a mark across here, now we have something over top of our color. So we turn that visibility eyeball on and we can see it. Another thing about layers, turn the visibility eyeball on. There's something when we right click here, it says create clipping mask. Now what a clipping mask is a clipping mask is essentially going to take any layer above the layer below it and make it automatically fit into that object. So we have this line, this yellow line here. If we press Alt or Option, that's the short key for a clipping mask. Press Alt or Option, click in between those two layers, and you'll see that box that drops down. Click that. Now that places this layer inside that rectangle. So it's like, that's one of the coolest magic tricks in Photoshop. And it's really helpful because you can place things right inside of other things without having to do any masking. It's called a clipping mask. You're saying anything in this layer fit into the layer below it. If I press Alt or Option again, you'll see that we didn't get rid of anything on the left or right hand side of that layer. Nothing disappeared. Alt or Option, it gets hidden in that box. So that's a really cool item there. Now, we also have something called a group. So let's just make a new layer, and now we're going to take this color line, and we'll make this color line right here. Okay? So what we'll do is we'll make a new group, and we'll call this lines. Anytime you double click on top of a text in a layer, it'll let you change it. Change whatever you want. So I'm going to take both of these, and if I press and hold Shift, or if I press Control on those two, I can drag them and drop them into that group. So now both of these lines are in a folder. We can minimize that folder, make that folder kind of disappear. All right. If we turn the eyeball off, we now don't have anything. So now this is not allowing me to make, I'm pressing Alt right now, and it's not allowing me to make a clipping mask of that group into the layer below. That's where regular masking is going to come in also. Now, regular masking can be used for many other things, but what I want to show you is that if you press Command or Control while you click on a layer, you're going to see the hand turns into what looks like the normal finger turns into a selection. So if you press Command or Control and click on that rectangle, it's going to make a selection for the rectangle. So then if we click on our group, you see we have mask over here. We can just click this button and create a mask. So what that has just done is it's created a black mask around the outside of our lines that now happens within a mask. The way a mask works, anything that's painted in black on a mask becomes subtractive. Anything painted white in a mask becomes additive. So looking at this mask, what we just did was we made a simple selection. Do that again. Control, click on our rectangle, simple selection, go up to our lines and make a mask so that they all fit in there. So we can't really do that clipping mask type of thing. All right. Now, if I click on the mask, you have to click on the mask and press the brush key. And then I have my brush set to black. Anywhere I brush with black is going to take it away. Now, it's not physically taking away because if I press Shift and click on that, that's taking away the effect of my mask. All right. Another thing you can do to see your mask is you can press the right bracket key. Next to the right bracket key, there's the backslash key. That backslash key makes everything red that is being taken away. So if I click right here, I can see that I have my white brush selected, so that's not subtractive. If I click here, takes away, click here, takes away, click here, takes away, click here, takes away. Now, it doesn't look like it's taking anything away because it's covered in red. But if I press that backslash key that's right next to the right bracket key above the enter key, now you can see that I've subtracted an area there. Now, if I don't like what I've subtracted there, I can just go and switch to white. Now, over here in the palette, you can press this little button that switches them back and forth, or you can press the X key and do it on the fly. So if I switch back to white, I can now paint and get all of that stuff back because I've painted that in white. If I press X, paint with black, it takes it away. So that's the basics of your layers and masking. Let's look at some other things with layers before we continue on. So let's go ahead and we'll take away this mask. If you want to take away a mask, you can just drag it and drop it in the trash. It's going to ask you, do you want to delete this mask? Yes, let's delete it. Okay. So we're going to open up this group. We're going to right click on this group and we're going to say ungroup layers. And then we'll just go ahead and delete this layer too. You can either drag it to the trash or you can click on it, press delete. All right, so what I'm going to do is click on layer 1. If you double click anywhere on the right side of layer 1, you're going to get layer style options. Now this is where things get really interesting, especially with text and fonts. You can bevel and emboss something. Now you're not going to be able to see it very well on this, so let me go ahead and make a regular line. So I'm going to go into my rectangular tool, switch to yellow, and just make a rectangle across here. I'll go ahead and rasterize that layer again. So what I'm going to do is double click on that. This is where you can bevel and emboss it to give it an embossed look. Anytime you want to switch to your magnifying glass on the fly, if you press the Command or Control key and the spacebar key, it'll turn it into the magnifying glass, and you can usually zoom in. It's not letting me do it right here because I'm in the layer style menu. Let me just go ahead and zoom in here real quick, out of the layer style menu, double click in the layer style menu again, bevel and emboss. You can change the depth of that bevel and emboss. You can also do things like a drop shadow. You can add a drop shadow to this. You can change the distance and the spread. Make all kinds of different things here. And this is really good to know, especially if you're doing any type of graphic design. That's how you get those graphic elements to simple layers like a square or a rectangle, just like you're seeing here. What you can also do there is change the color. You can change the color overlay to something like blue, a different color of blue, and now we've got a different color of blue. So that's the basic layer and masking, bare bones basic idea behind layers and masking. Let's look at a practical application though for photographers. I had to show you some examples because it makes it easier to kind of see. Let's look at some practical application here. Let's go ahead and open this layer of a building and this layer of a sky. So you see our building here doesn't have a very nice sky. You see our sky here looks pretty interesting. All right. So what we can go ahead and do here is do some complex things with our masking and layering to make this a little bit more attractive. So like we saw before, this is the current layer. We want to put something behind it. So if I double click this background layer, press OK, I can go over to my magic wand tool or my quick selection tool, which I prefer, and I can make a selection for that background. If it selects a little too much, like you're seeing here on the sides of this building, if I press Alt or Option, that'll switch me over to the negative key, the negative selection mode, and then release Alt or Option to go back to the plus, and we'll go ahead and get this all nice and cleaned up. Make that selection nice and clean. Okay. Now, it's a very simple selection. All right, there's nothing major to this. If we want to make this selection a little bit better, we can go to do something called Refine Edge. Now, if you see the edge of our mask looks really bad, if I go ahead and click on the Alt or Option key to take that away, we can get rid of that. Let's just go ahead and add to this by clicking and dragging along the edge of our building here to make sure our building is being selected properly. Okay, that's going to help us out a little bit. Now with the Refine Edge tool, there's all kinds of different things that are in here. You got Smart Radius, you got different types of edges that you can create with this. We're just going to go ahead and press OK with this. We're just trying to make a very simple selection of our background. Now what I'm going to do here is I'm going to make a mask. So if I click this little icon here, it's going to make a mask. Now, if you ever see this happen, we made the selection for the sky. So whatever we selected and then press the mask key, that's what it's going to keep. If you ever want the inverse of that, just press Command or Control I, click on the mask, Command or Control I, and we now have the building back. If you look at what happened there, it just inverted our mask. That's all invert does. Command or Control I is invert. Okay? So now let's take the sky that we have over here. We'll press the V key for move it over onto this layer. Now, if you look at this, you'll see that this layer is clearly much larger than our layer before. I did that on purpose to show you that sometimes images are very small and we bring in large images over top of it. Sometimes the starting image is very large and we bring in small images. You can press Command or Control T. Command or Control T is going to allow you to get into free transform mode. Now the problem is you can't see the edges. So if you press Command or Control 0, that's going to make it so that you can see the edges. Look at how much larger this image is compared to our other one. So if we click on one of these guys up here, shift and drag it in, and then shift down here and drag it up, we can get this on the same size as our regular image. Now again, that hotkey for the magnifying glass, Control or Command and the space bar, right click, fit on screen. Okay? So now what we're going to do is we're going to put the clouds, right now the clouds are on top of our other layer. We want our clouds underneath the other layer. So all we have to do is drag this, drop it underneath. So now we can move our clouds to where we want them. All the way until you see that they're going to be clipped on the sides. So if we go to about here, that looks pretty good. Alright? That looks pretty good. I like that. So now what we can do is actually create something called an adjustment layer. Now an adjustment layer is, let's say these two objects don't quite match up and want to make them a little closer to reality as to what or how they could match up. What we could do is go to this little icon right here. That's called an adjustment layer. Let's say for this one we take hue saturation. So I'm going to look at the saturation of the blue up here. I can drop this hue saturation layer all the way down. Notice how it's not affecting the layer above, because the layer above, which is this building, takes precedence. It's standing on top of all the layers underneath. You have to think about things three-dimensionally. Even though it's a two-dimensional plane, you have to think about 3 dimensions of layers here. If I take this layer and drag it out on the top, it's going to make the whole thing desaturated. So let's bring it below. Okay, we're playing with saturation for the sky. Move this up. I can increase the saturation in the sky to maybe match the saturation in the windows. I can also change the hue of the sky to make the hue of the sky match those windows better. So a little bit more vibrant in the blues to kind of match the reflection that we're seeing off the side of the building here. Now on the flip side, I can go over here, I can make an adjustment layer on the top. So if I make that adjustment layer on the top, let's say I want to make the building darker. Alright, so I go and get a curves adjustment layer. Bring down the curve a little bit to make it darker, but oops, it's taken over everything. It's not just affecting the building, it's affecting everything else. So how do we make it so that it just affects the building? Press that alter option for the clipping mask. Notice the alter option for the clipping mask is also right here. We can make that a clipping mask that only affects the building. Alright? So now it's only affecting the building. We don't have to worry about it affecting the background. We can do anything we want because now it's only affecting the building. So we could, increase our highlights here and decrease our shadows here to make that a little bit darker, kind of stand out a little bit away from our sky. So that's the basics of layer masking and layer control in Photoshop. So what we talked about in the very beginning was we talked about laying out your workspace to ensure that your workspace matches the intent of what you're trying to do. If you're trying to work on a photograph, you make sure that you have the photography workspace open. We then talked about the layers palette. Actually, before we went into layers palette, we talked about making sure that your preferences were set up so that you could easily drag and drop things from one image to the next without worrying about your windows getting docked up here or opening up as tabs. Alright, the next thing we discussed was building your first layer, creating a new layer. We then talked about grouping. We talked about clipping masks. Clipping masks are extremely important that you can take what's above one layer and just make it affect the layer below it without affecting the entire image. We talked about grouping. We talked about regular masking. Masking being that if you create a mask, like you see this mask over here, we press B for the brush key and we paint with black. That's going to take away. Black is subtractive, white is additive. Okay, so always make sure you remember that. Black is subtractive, white is additive. Anytime you're painting on a mask, it's really easy to remember that as you're painting on that mask. We then talked about the practical application of masking, how you could create a mask on an image just like this that had a horrible sky, and you could put a sky behind it using a mask. Make a selection for the sky, and then you make the mask, put the sky behind it, and then you can make individual adjustment layers for each one of those areas to make the image overall more dynamic than it was when you first started. So my name is Blake Rudis with EverydayHDR.com and HDRinsider.com. If you liked this tutorial, please share it. I know there's a lot of people that need to understand the basics in the beginning and the beginning workings of masking. It's come through multiple times on my email this week, so I felt that was something that really needed to be discussed amongst the masses. You can find out more about who I am and what I do at EverydayHDR.com. I've got several different training options out there, as well as HDRinsider.com. So thank you for watching this tutorial. I really do appreciate it. If you like it, subscribe.